The moment he shut the door behind him, I felt an emptiness so profound it nearly stole my breath. My ears still rang with the echoes of his final words, a pitiful, "I'm sorry but I love her." My heart hammered in my chest, and my entire body trembled as I realized he wasn't coming back. After a decade of marriage, the man I built my life around was walking out of our home, our plans, and our shared dreams for someone younger, someone he deemed more exciting. I could barely stand, blinded by an agony that seared through me from head to toe. Little did he, or I, know how quickly everything in his world would unravel. I sometimes wonder if it all started years ago, some subtle rift appearing the day we stopped sharing the same sense of wonder at life. There's a temptation to blame myself, to think I should have seen the signs, but the truth is that sometimes love dies in the shadows. I first caught a hint of his restlessness when he began working late almost every night. Before that, we had a rhythm: shared dinners, spontaneous weekend getaways, and quiet evenings planning our future. Gradually, those moments became rarer. He claimed his business demanded more of his time, that expansions and new deals waited for no one. I believed him, partly because I wanted to, and partly because it was easier than facing the possibility that our marriage was disintegrating. Over the years, he had built a respectable manufacturing firm from the ground up. He specialized in components for small electronics, an unglamorous but crucial niche. I'd been so proud of him, telling friends and family how hardworking he was, how I supported his ambition. Maybe in my eagerness to be the supportive wife, I turned a blind eye to how distant he was becoming. One night, as I was tidying up the kitchen after yet another lonely dinner, I noticed a new cologne clinging to his coat, a scent I didn't recognize. At first, I shoved the thought aside, reminding myself that he met plenty of clients. But doubt began to gnaw at me. The next week, I found myself waiting up until well past midnight, phone in hand, texting him, only to receive a single response: "Stuck at work. Don't wait up." That tension in my gut never quite eased after that. Eventually, the truth came out in the harshest way. I'd confronted him in a rare moment when he was actually home at a reasonable hour. He admitted he was confused, that he'd met someone new, a younger consultant who'd been involved in one of his expansion projects. Her energy, he said, reminded him of what it felt like to be young and fearless. For a split second, I remember feeling as if I were drowning. Questions tumbled out of me. Why didn't he talk to me about feeling unfulfilled? When had he stopped loving me? Did our marriage really mean so little to him? He offered no real answers, just guilt-ridden apologies. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who begs someone to stay, but in the heated swirl of heartbreak, I pleaded with him, tears streaming down my face. I told him we could work through this, that we could go to counseling, start over, rebuild the spark we once had. But his eyes were already distant, locked onto some fantasy life he planned to share with the woman he called Fresh Excitement. After that conversation, it was just a matter of days before he packed his suitcase. He left behind a hollow house, a slew of unpaid bills, and my broken heart. For the next few weeks, I was a barely functioning shell, going through motions: sleep, wake, force myself to eat. Friends tried to rally around me, but I usually ended up sobbing in their arms or staring blankly into space. It felt like the heartbreak alone might crush me. And then, as if the universe were taking twisted pleasure in my misery, I heard he'd officially moved in with her. Worse, he paraded the relationship on social media. Pictures of them dining in fancy restaurants or attending industry conferences popped up in my news feed through mutual acquaintances. Seeing them together, a man I had once known so intimately, now smiling ear to ear with a woman nearly a decade younger, reopened the wound daily. At the same time, I had to figure out how to pay the mortgage, manage the grocery bills, and keep my life afloat. My job as a freelance graphic designer didn't bring in an abundance of income. In the early years of our marriage, I'd let my career take a back seat, believing wholeheartedly in his business and focusing on supporting him. I'd handle our home's day-to-day tasks, occasionally dabbling in small projects. Now, with him gone, I was forced to ramp up my work drastically, pitching to new clients and trying to build a portfolio that could sustain me. The stress of it all, combined with the betrayal, felt insurmountable. I lost weight. My hair started falling out in clumps from the strain. Anxiety attacks replaced restful sleep. One afternoon, I received a phone call from his mother. She was a stern woman who never fully embraced me, but had always maintained a cordial politeness. "I'm sorry he did this to you," she said, voice heavy with regret. "I wish I'd taught him better. I heard he's doubling down on expansions again. I only hope it doesn't blow up in his face." For a moment, sympathy twisted inside me. I responded quietly, "He's chosen his path and I've chosen mine." She sighed and we ended the call. But that conversation planted a seed of curiosity about his business dealings. After all, I had no idea how far along he was with those expansions. About 2 months post-separation, rumors started trickling through mutual acquaintances. He had opened a new production line that required significant capital. Apparently, he had borrowed heavily against future orders that were nowhere near confirmed. I heard from someone else that he'd spent a small fortune trying to wine and dine prospective investors, often appearing at lavish events with his younger partner on his arm. The image was all style, flashy suits, expensive champagne, Instagrammable experiences. But behind the glitz was a precarious financial structure. People whispered that some major clients were backing out, frustrated by quality control issues or inflated costs. In essence, the business was turning into a house of cards. At first, I wanted to feel righteous satisfaction, but heartbreak doesn't morph easily into schadenfreude. Instead, I felt conflicted. This man had torn my world apart, left me scrambling to pay bills, and humiliated me. Yet part of me remembered when we'd first started dreaming about building a future together. We were just kids, wide-eyed about the possibilities. We didn't have much money, but we were rich in love and ambition. It hurt to see that version of him vanish in the rearview mirror. Then came the day I received an unexpected text from him. "Can we talk?" he wrote. My heart pounded. I was torn between blocking him outright and ignoring him or hearing him out. Curiosity won. I called him, bracing myself for some kind of guilt-ridden apology or perhaps a request for me to sign some financial documents. His voice on the other end sounded subdued, a far cry from the cocky confidence he'd displayed when he left. He mumbled that his business was going through a rough patch and that he might need help. My first reaction was to laugh, not out of joy but from sheer incredulity. "You left me," I said bluntly. "Why would you think I can help you?" There was a long pause. I could almost hear him grappling with shame. "You always had a way with marketing and design. Our new brand approach, it's not hitting the right notes. I just thought, maybe you could advise me?" I nearly choked on my own disbelief. This man who had walked out on me for a younger, more exciting version, was coming back to me for professional help? I told him I'd think about it, then hung up. The next day, a mutual friend mentioned that his bankruptcy papers were nearly filed. He was drowning in debt from expansions gone wrong. Investors were suing him, employees had quit due to unpaid wages, and clients were pulling contracts. This wasn't just a rough patch, it was a full-scale implosion. Word on the street was that the new partner, his younger woman, was none too pleased with the precarious financial state. Her father had apparently disapproved of their relationship from the start, considering my husband a financial risk. The friend told me that she'd already moved out of their expensive condo, leaving him to foot the lease alone. Hearing that last detail sparked a tidal wave of conflicting emotions: bitterness, relief, pity. The man who left me was now facing ruin, all while the person he had chosen over me abandoned him in the moment of crisis. Over the next few days, I struggled with whether or not to meet him. Part of me wanted to slam the door in his face as he had done to me. Another part, that piece of me that still remembered the day we said our vows, felt a reluctant compassion. But compassion for what? In the end, I met him, mostly to gain closure for myself. We arranged to see each other at a little cafe we used to frequent back when we were in love. The irony stung. I arrived first, sipping a chamomile tea to calm my nerves. He walked in looking thinner, older. The vibrant swagger in his step was gone. Shadows circled his eyes. As soon as he saw me, he tried to force a smile, but it faltered. He told me the story in fits and starts as though ashamed. How a few large deals had fallen through, how he had sunk personal funds he'd partly acquired through shady loans, into a second factory line. Then quality control issues had forced him to recall an entire batch of products. Soon the negative press scared off clients. Investors pulled out, leaving him with enormous debt. He admitted that in the swirl of it all, he'd sought temporary solace in his new partner's flattery, but once the money and glitz dried up, she'd vanished. At first, I just listened, absorbing his words in silence. Then he mustered the nerve to ask if I'd lend my talents, either design or marketing consulting, to help him rebrand. If we succeeded, he believed the company might have a slim chance of survival. He said all the things I once dreamed of him saying when we were married, how he valued my insight, how he respected my opinions, how creative I was. But now it all felt hollow and far too late. I stared at him, seeing the face of a man who'd ripped out my heart. I found my voice shakier than I intended. "I gave you everything I had for 10 years, I said quietly. "I supported your dreams, put my career on hold, tried to build a life with you. You threw me aside when it suited you. And now you want my help because it suits you again?" He didn't deny it. Instead, he offered a sad nod, tears brimming in his eyes. I had never known him to cry, not even at his father's funeral years ago. Seeing him so broken was jarring, but I stood my ground. What if I say no? I asked, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. He looked down at the table, fiddling with a paper napkin. Then I'm done, he whispered. I'll probably declare bankruptcy officially. Everything I worked for disappears. He took a shaky breath. And I'll deserve it, I guess. In that moment, I realized this conversation wasn't about saving his business for my sake. It was about salvaging the scraps of pride he had left. We parted without any promises on my end. I could hardly believe the magnitude of his request. After all he'd done, he still expected me to be a savior of sorts. When I got home, I called my best friend, sobbing. She was furious on my behalf, insisting that I cut him out entirely, that the last thing I owed him was a lifeline. For weeks, I wrestled with the decision. Part of me wanted to cling to a moral high ground. He made his bed, now let him lie in it. But a subtler voice reminded me that once I'd loved him enough to imagine forever. My contribution might keep people employed. The workers who depended on the company might lose their jobs if he went under. That reality weighed on me. The employees were not to blame for his foolish expansions or personal betrayals. As a result, I decided to propose a strict professional arrangement. I'd serve as a freelance consultant for a fair market rate, with terms documented, just as I would for any other client. No emotional entanglements, no false illusions. If he accepted these conditions, I'd do the job to the best of my ability. He agreed immediately, looking almost relieved. We hammered out a contract. Every step of the process felt surreal, as if I were dealing with a stranger rather than the man I once called my husband. I insisted on a business-like approach. Meetings at neutral locations, email communication only, no talk about personal topics. My main task was to revamp the brand identity. The existing marketing materials were archaic, overshadowed by the negative press swirling around his impending bankruptcy. I redesigned the logo, wrote new copy that emphasized reliability, and pitched a crisis communication strategy that would, at the very least, show the public he was working to rectify the damage. Watching him attempt to salvage his crumbling empire was like peering at the final act of a Shakespearean tragedy. He'd arrive at meetings visibly exhausted, sometimes sporting the same clothes as the day before. The flamboyant younger partner was never mentioned again. I suppose she was just a memory, a lesson in fleeting desires. Gradually, a small glimmer of progress emerged. A couple of local clients stuck around, impressed by the changes we were implementing. They gave him a second chance, placing smaller, scaled-back orders. No one was under the illusion that we'd recoup the business's former glory. But it was something. Meanwhile, I was rebuilding my own life. My freelance work, which began out of desperation after he left, had blossomed into a modest but growing enterprise. Thanks to word of mouth and my enhanced portfolio, I signed new clients. It felt empowering to stand on my own, no longer overshadowed by his success or overshadowed by the label of the wife behind the business. Every day that passed, I felt a little stronger, a little more certain of my worth. He and I had parted ways romantically, but oddly enough, we were now connected by a purely professional thread. Then the final blow came. A major investor with whom he'd been negotiating poured cold water on any chance of significant funding. They cited the instability in the company's finances and the ongoing lawsuits from unpaid contractors. I watched his face crumble as he read the rejection email on his phone. He closed his eyes, seemingly forcing himself not to break down right there. He turned to me, choking on his words. "I guess that's it," he said. "I've done all I can. Bankruptcy is inevitable." I nodded, strangely calm. We both knew the writing had been on the wall for months. With no further capital, it was merely a matter of legal process. He would lose the factories, the brand, all of it. The next week, I submitted my final invoice for the branding work. He looked so defeated signing the check that my heart briefly twisted. I realized in that moment that the bitterness within me had subsided into something more akin to pity and acceptance. This was the end of his business, and in many ways, it was the end of our story. When the bankruptcy court date arrived, I didn't attend. I had no reason to. Instead, I received periodic updates through our attorneys. It turned out he had next to nothing left in assets after paying partial debts. His once enviable home, where he'd lived with her, was repossessed. Every deposit, every piece of equipment, got auctioned off to cover outstanding liabilities. I heard he was sleeping on a friend's couch, a far cry from the plush condo he and the younger woman once shared. Life has an uncanny way of moving on even when everything feels shattered. Months passed and I found my new normal. My graphic design business thrived well enough for me to rent a better apartment. The healing process was slow, but it was there, like a seed pushing through the dirt, aiming for sunlight. I discovered that I enjoyed gardening, ironically enough, nurturing tiny seedlings on my windowsill as a sort of metaphor for my own renewed growth. I also started traveling a bit, ironically utilizing the air miles we'd once collected together. It felt good to step away from the city, from the ghosts of my old life. During that period I also went to therapy, confronting the tangled mess of hurt and betrayal. My therapist helped me understand that while he had chosen to leave, I had a choice in how I responded, how I built my future. Slowly, the devastating heartbreak receded, replaced by a cautious optimism. My nights were no longer haunted by images of him with someone younger. Instead, I found myself filled with gratitude that I was free to chart my own course. Sometimes I'd get updates about him from mutual friends or random news items about the final liquidation of his assets. Each time I felt less anger. Through therapy, I learned that letting go is a process, not a single decision. And with each day that I worked on my own life, my career, my home, my well-being, I felt the echoes of his betrayal lose their power. That's not to say everything was roses and sunshine. There were times I'd wake up, heart pounding from nightmares that replayed the moment he walked out. There were also pangs of sadness when I found old photographs of us on a trip to the mountains, both of us beaming with carefree smiles. We'd believed in forever then. But life had taken a turn neither of us predicted. About a year after the bankruptcy was finalized, I ran into him by chance at a coffee shop. He was seated alone at a corner table, looking gaunt, flipping through a newspaper. When I walked in, our eyes locked briefly. My instinct was to turn around and flee, but I forced myself to remain calm, to acknowledge him with a nod. Unexpectedly, he stood up and approached me, his posture hesitant. I'm sorry, he said, voice breaking, once he was close enough that only I could hear. I know it's too late, but I am. For everything. I was stunned by the raw sincerity in his tone. A year earlier, I might have craved those words, but now they felt like a gust of wind blowing across a healed scar. I appreciated them, but I no longer needed them. It was all a long time ago, I replied gently, even though it had been only a year and change. Time has a way of stretching and compressing in moments of emotional upheaval. I hope you're doing okay, I added out of politeness. He paused, blinking back tears. I'm trying to start over, he said. Looking for a new job, a new place. It's harder than I imagined. A part of me empathized. Another part remembered the nights I cried myself to sleep when he left, the weeks I subsisted on instant noodles. I understood that starting over was never easy. We exchanged a few more pleasantries, how therapy had helped me, how he was trying to piece together whatever shards of dignity he had left. Then I told him I had to go, politely excusing myself. Before I left, he asked if I could ever forgive him. I hesitated, heart beating fast. I think I already have, I said, surprising even myself. And that was the truth. The anger that once consumed me had dissolved into acceptance, understanding, and a sense of pity for him. Without waiting for his response, I walked away. That's how it ended, quietly, without a grand finale or dramatic confrontation. He once left me for a younger woman, believing that excitement and novelty would solve whatever dissatisfaction he felt. In the aftermath, his business, the pride of his life, collapsed under the weight of reckless ambition and a lack of the support system he had once taken for granted. My life, though battered, continued forward. I discovered that I was stronger, more resourceful, and more resilient than I ever gave myself credit for. These days I rarely think of him. When I do, it's with a mixture of nostalgia for the good memories and compassion for the man who made self-destructive choices. I'm not naive enough to think I could ever trust him again or that we'd be friends. But I don't harbor resentment. Life's too short for that, and I've built a future where my happiness doesn't hinge on his presence or approval. I've also learned something crucial: heartbreak can catalyze transformation. The woman I was when he walked out, lost, financially unstable, plagued by self-doubt, no longer exists. In her place stands someone who has fought for her own sense of identity, learned new skills, and refused to let a broken marriage define her. I discovered a wellspring of strength I never suspected, forging a new life out of the wreckage. Occasionally, when I see a couple holding hands in the park or laughing over coffee, I feel a flutter of longing for companionship. But I'm no longer willing to settle. I want a partner who respects me, who walks alongside me rather than overshadowing me. And if that partner never materializes, I know I can still craft a full, rich life on my own. The heartbreak taught me that too. Some nights, I'll read a favorite novel or watch the sunset from my balcony, thinking about how far I've come. The younger woman who once occupied his affections is just a footnote in my story. She represented his pursuit of something that sparkled briefly, only to fade. And in a twist of fate, his entire livelihood unraveled not long after. I don't wish pain on him, or her, because that's not how I want to live. The best vindication I've discovered is living well, healing thoroughly, and creating new joys that no betrayal can tarnish. And so, yes, my husband left me for a younger woman. But then his business went bankrupt and he lost nearly everything he once valued. Meanwhile, I discovered the true extent of my resilience, rebuilt my career from the ground up, and learned to love myself in ways I never had before. In the end, the heartbreak that once threatened to destroy me became the crucible in which I forged a stronger, wiser version of who I am meant to be. I'm still walking that path of self-discovery, mind you. There are days when the past creeps in, whispering doubts and regrets. Sometimes I wonder if I could have done anything differently to keep our marriage intact. But life has shown me that not every story is meant to last forever, and not every question has a tidy answer. The important thing is to allow yourself to grieve, to grow, and to embrace the new life that beckons from the other side of loss. Looking back, I can hardly recognize the woman who once thought her world ended the moment he walked out. If I could speak to her now, I'd tell her, hold on. You'll be amazed at your capacity to survive. You'll be stunned at what you can accomplish once you stop pouring your energy into someone who isn't reciprocating. You'll not only survive this blow, you'll become someone you respect more deeply than you ever did before. Yes, heartbreak leaves scars. But scars are proof of healing, testaments to the battles we've endured and overcome. My ex-husband's downfall doesn't fill me with joy or triumph. If anything, it's a cautionary tale about choices and consequences. Still, I found the closure I needed, and in doing so, I reclaimed my power. My world didn't end when he left. It just transformed into something new, something that ultimately feels far more authentic to who I am. So, in the quiet of my home, where once I paced and cried and felt impossibly alone, I now feel peace. I fill the rooms with my own laughter, with the hum of clients calling, with the new passions I've discovered. I let the sunshine filter through the curtains each morning, reminding me that every day is a chance for rebirth. And as I wake up, I affirm that I'm no longer defined by a man who broke his vows. I'm free, free to love, free to create, free to exist fully on my own terms. His business went bankrupt. My heart was shattered. But from those shards, I pieced together a life that's truly mine, unburdened by illusions. It's not always easy, but it's real. And in that reality lies a truth I've fought hard to earn. I am stronger than betrayal, braver than heartache, and worthy of the kind of happiness that endures, even if it took a devastating storm to reveal the light within me.